Good morning, everyone. This video, in and of itself, is the whole reason why I have several tabs open already. And in the process, I found something that's just like, mmm. Exactly. Exactly. When the internet is so full of naked women that most people are desensitized to it, an attractive woman with a nice personality and a modest dress that fits her well is way more interesting and unique. Which is to say, the fact that someone values themselves becomes attractive. Ah, the shoulders are showing indeed. Well, it's a sense of uncorrupted innocence in a world that tries to corrupt about every single piece of innocence to be marketable. The thing is, you try to pin down children or any existence which has instincts as a person down to one specific category, and thus you exclude other forms of experience. You always have people who are genuinely virtuous and innocent from the get-go. And then you'll have those who kind of are, but kind of aren't. More so just wild. And that difference isn't a bad thing, but in creating a completely sanitary environment, you recreate the optimal conditions for abnormality to spread like wildfire. Freedom is a drug, convenience is a drug, hope is a drug. Not necessarily a physical drug, but a psychological drug. The funny thing is that when you think about chemistry in the human body, then yeah, every single chemical and neurological reaction is the result of being drugged. But without those drugs, things wouldn't function. So there are necessary drugs, which is an interesting facet of reality. Also, the reason why I started recording, to jump back over here, Clueless Big Sister. That is the perspective on what I thought of the dork. Because on one hand, the cluelessness is exactly the trait that is endearing. On the other hand, that cluelessness is also the very trait that's going to cause so many troubles, stress, and problems for anyone involved if it is not addressed with care and patience and kindness. Uh, Opposite sex? No, same-sex heroine will feel the need to protect this person from evil world and all the wolves around, while at the same time getting inevitably riled up and fighting their own primal urges in the process. When you're dealing with a hunger to be understood and cared about at the same time, On top of everything, yeah, no. It's no wonder why I broke. It's no wonder why I had my moments of weakness. Because time and time and time again, I was trying to do what I thought was the right thing, what I was told was the right thing. It didn't feel like the right thing. It felt like just leaving someone I cared about up for grabs, up for the mishandling of others. That staying quiet felt like I was abandoning them as well. Sure, maybe they were comfortable with it, and by all means, I can respect and acknowledge, give room for that space. But at some point along the way, the idea of having struggled so much with this and ending up earning their trust when they didn't even know what I was dealing with or going through because I purposefully suppressed my communication so as to not enforce an obligation on them. The idea of earning their trust from that angle just felt wrong. Felt like a lack of respect rather than genuine respect. Felt like I was belittling them and telling them that they're smaller. When no, they're not. They're a person. Sure, maybe their emotional maturity isn't as much as I would like, but that doesn't mean you coddle them or tell them things that they want to hear. That means you respect them and their agency and let them know, hey, I don't think this is okay. Ah. And they thought they were doing the right thing by helping me in their attempt to help me by respecting my struggle when you can respect it without restraining your feedback. You can respect it without saying that you're okay when you're clearly uncomfortable. I don't want you running through the rest of your life having the inability to speak your mind just because the world told you not to. I want to hear you speak your mind. I want to hear you say something, damn it. I want to hear you use your voice louder than the mania that blinds people to their actions. So that way you can actually be there with the people you care about. So that way you can actually let someone be there with you instead of assuming that you're shameful or something to be avoided or managed. The pace I want to tackle all that, that's my own thing. The pace that they choose to tackle all that should be their own choice and their own freedom. And that's what I valued the most was their choice and their freedom. Even if I really sucked at expressing or showing it because I was emotionally overloaded. I wanted to give them the very thing I wish I could have been given. And it hurts to know that assumptions, miscommunication, and social programming social conventions ended up turning all of my efforts into a negative impact. Me trying my best, I ended up having a negative impact. There's nothing to be proud of there. There's nothing to say, I'm glad I tried my best, because my best fucking went about and hurt someone I cared so deeply about. And now I can't tell if I should go and let them know that they aren't shameful, for risk of their defenses kicking in and throwing me under the bridge again, under the bus or whatever. Or if I should just leave them be to figure it out on their own time and framing, because to try and force anything would only hurt them more. I don't know what to do, and it's scary. It's terrifying. Because I want them to acknowledge their flaws without beating themselves up over it. I want to see them reclaim their agency instead of being manipulated by people who use their own reactiveness and emotional vulnerability against them. Damn it. Fucking damn it. Ew. Okay, that's messed up. Instead, a person was stripped of all social meanings and became an object of gaze, an object to be looked at. An object with neither history nor future, let alone or own thoughts or desires. Yeah. That is not what. No, that is the opposite of it. Oh, oh no. These representations were firmly rooted in new emerging middle class discourse, which was characterized by cleanliness, naturalness, and a lack of any desires or thoughts. Because there are some people who are like that, but not every person is like that at that age. Some people are born with desires and thoughts already running by the time they're 4. Other people will wait until other people go through life up until like their fucking 30s even, running on a lack of the personal desires or personal thoughts because they've been taught to suppress them, because they've been taught to play their role and perform for the society. Like, sure, there may have been generational trauma before this, before all of this that's listed in this study and research and paper. But holy fuck, did this shit amplify that over the course of 2 world wars in the technological innovation age. A sense of innocence is priceless, but that does not mean innocence is to be without any desires or thoughts. Rather, it is the state of simply embodying those desires and thoughts so completely that they don't seem to be anything other than a natural part of the moment. Oh. I would say the root innocence is a sense of wonder or a sense of being open to the world because the world has not proved how cruel it is yet. And that's the thing that such media and programming attempts to preserve without understanding the impact of choosing to preserve it and failing to recognize the equivalence of opposites. Something is sanctified and isolated away from an other relative peer, and so its flaws are ignored. And when those flaws show, people are shamed for it, when that's not functional. That's toxic shame. Healthy shame lets you learn about how you relate to another person and what kind of impact you had. Let alone, like, hey, maybe you don't want to do that again. Toxic shame tells you you should be this way, you should be that way. It tells you how the world should works instead of sitting down and acknowledging how it actually works. And that's fucked. Unfortunately, that's also why I accidentally did. Fucking. Oh. It is the job of a creature to play so that way it may prepare itself for future difficulties. It is how animals learn to survive their environments without encountering real danger. You see it in many different animals throughout the world. Fucking any of the large predator cat species, they tumble and tussle. Wolves and dogs and other creatures play fight because that fighting in and of itself is an important skill that they will use later on in life. The natural instinct of any living structure is to play with that which it finds important to its future. And because some things are important to some people's futures and some things aren't, we have people arguing about what should or shouldn't be played with, which then creates an unintentional arms race between those who want to explore the full depth of play and dynamics inside of a single concept, and others who just want to operate around the basic fundamentals of that concept for the simplicity of their own life. Ah. I don't agree with that sentiment, though I do agree that that is the social context via which it was understood most easily. The idea of innocence is not static or unchanging, rather, it was fragile and corruptible, which meant that children's innocence needed to be controlled. But it's exactly because something is fragile and corruptible that it needs to be respected, not controlled. Not blindly respected to the sense of that gentle parroting, but not blindly controlled to the extent of authoritarianism either. Oh, fucking yikes. Innocence is, in that sense, a paradox. It was present, and at the same time, it was also absent. Which explains why I'm able to comprehend these things from my perspective. Because the one thing, the two concepts that I had the clearest and easiest access to inside my own head and relative to my life experiences. Presence is purple, which means that my sense of presence when growing up was rooted in a decay value and or eldritch or pure knowledge based. Absence, which is all the way over on the right, the meaningless trek onward with no sense of purpose or destination. And then we have impulse and spite as separate components there too, with our sense of self being juxtaposed against the idea of absence, when in reality, absence is also a reference point to the self. Oh, oh joy. To isolate in a means to protect can enable a sense of safety that never had to fight for itself, and thus when someone walks along and imposes their will over that space without the previous experience of fighting back or imposing one's own will to maintain one's own space, people just collapse and conform to what other people want. Oh. Hmm. So I got attached to the dense stork as the, let's see, clueless big sister. Opposite of clueless would be like hyper aware little sister. The hyper aware little sister both wants to protect and to mess with her clueless big sister. Oh, how lovely. As fetishized passive objects. You. The emblem of availability. And thus those who are hungry to be accepted are drawn towards that emblem, that sense of availability, that sense of openness and freedom, because they're trying to get their own core craving satisfied and looked after. What are girls left with? Abstinence only education during the day and Girls Gone Wild commercials at night. We are teaching people, and girls too, one way or another, their bodies and sexuality are what make them valuable. This sexual double standard is alive and well, and it is irreversibly damaging people. And that's what I want to fight against. I want to fight that damage so that way people can have the choice of exploring this at their own pace, while also still holding the capacity to meet reality where it's at and deal with things that they aren't fully comfortable with yet. Not to the sense where they get overwhelmed and they lose their capacity to feel like they can understand and overcome this concept. I don't want people's identities becoming consumed by the concepts. I don't want people's identities becoming consumed or subsumed by the concepts that they are not yet ready to handle. And at the same time, I know that if I were to try and keep them isolated away from such concepts, I would bear the weight of that cost and would be setting them up for failure by failing to let them play with a more immature idea of the concept that would allow them to then be better prepared for accepting the more brutal reality of a concept. Just like how vaccines exist to give the body immunity to viruses by presenting a weakened version that allows for clear understanding and initial deployment of an understanding that has a higher chance to detect the virus in the first place once the real thing comes around. Conceptual interaction is the same. And that's where I hurt the dork by speaking up as late as I did. Because on one hand, yes, I was doing my best to respect them, and in that regard, I was correcting a wrong. However, because I had waited so long to correct that wrong, I had let the concept hold pressure, influence, and weight over the entire situation to the point where it built itself up as something beyond either person's control, which isn't the reality. Both people have the agency to confront and control that concept, that interplay between my desires and their boundaries. But because someone wasn't aware of that, or because I didn't jump to initiating that process first thing, the other person ended up hurt and potentially subsumed by the concept. Which means ultimately that regardless of how much or little I knew, I failed someone I care about. And I'm still learning how to, A, how to prevent that from happening, and B, how to make sure that I can reach out and let them know so that way they can take the time to be there for themselves instead of feeling ashamed of something that they don't have the proper tools to tackle or handle. And that and here's the thing. A lot of this comes down to assumptions on what the other person is and isn't capable of. I sensed that through instinct and projected what I felt was appropriately relevant. That doesn't make it the reality of their actual agency or capacity. And that juxtaposition is one of the key frictions and sources of conflict that keeps me from having a clear and easy answer. So until I resolve that juxtaposition by acknowledging the between space and allowing it to be the focal point, so that way I have a dynamic scale of capacity versus intention. Capacity relative to intention. Has the capacity, has the intention. Doesn't have the capacity, doesn't have the intention. In order to earn capacity, you need to be able to hold on to your intention. Not blindly to the point of protecting that intention from mistakes, but reasonably so that way you can learn from one's own intention and experiences. In the same work, Nietzsche offers a striking aphorism on the innocent corruption of institutions, or as I would like to frame it, the sanctuary paradox. Innocent corruption. In all institutions into which the sharp air of public criticism does not penetrate, an innocent corruption grows up like a mushroom. Here, innocence refers to corruption that arises not from malice, from the absence of critical oversight, i.e., in creating a safe space for specific people or specific attributes, you unintentionally create the potential for people to treat that space as sacred or above others, which then allows for a sense of entitlement and elitism to infect the structure from within, not because people want to be mean, but because they just want to avoid discomfort. Which I honestly, that's what the thing is, the dense stork is dealing with. In the same work, Nietzsche offers a striking aphorism on the innocent corruption of institutions. Here, innocence refers to corruption that arises not from malice, but from absence of critical oversight, i.e., being present in the moment emotionally without being absorbed in one's own experience so thoroughly that one fails to keep a hold on recognizing others' experiences. Innocent scoundrel. There's a slow, gradual path to vice and scoundrelhood of every kind. In the end, the swarms of insects on bad consequences have completely left those who walk this path. They walk through, and they walk, though completely depraved, yet in innocence. This paradoxical formulation captures something essential about Nietzsche's thinking on innocence. It can exist even in apparent moral corruption when actions flow naturally and without the torment of bad conscience. And so you cannot just use moral high ground to strike at someone to get them to learn their lesson. If you do, then they will attempt self-defense of their own innocence, which means that you must, in order to properly connect and heal and teach and prevent generational trauma, one must recognize both the impact of someone's actions and the reality that someone may not even be aware that their actions are having negative impacts, so as to not hold shame above their head like a guillotine, to behead them and leave them running around in fear and panic. Because that's the one thing you want to prevent, because that defensive state then just amplifies everything. That's a virtue that takes the detour of hell to heaven. This passage reveals innocence as a dangerous Christian trap that paradoxically produces its opposite, guilt and self-loathing. Or, as I like to call it, toxic shame! Which is a step forward, but since it stands in contrast to the original disjunction, it can have instances where it flows completely in the opposite direction. To the point of it subsuming and consuming one's identity in the idea of sensuality and endless enjoyment, which in and of itself then becomes a innocence that creates conflict, just like the previous innocence that came before it. For someone who's only known one thing, the other framing of innocence could very well be the thing that helps them heal and get back to a balanced sense of innocence. Something between desire and a lack thereof. If taken to an extreme, it can corrupt people just the same. The three great stimulants of the exhausted, the brutal, the artificial, and the innocent or idiotic. This triad reveals innocence in its negative aspect, as a kind of idiotic naivety that appeals to decadent modern sensibilities. Or rather, this triad reveals innocence in its negative aspect, a lack of awareness that appeals to those who are endlessly tired of being all too aware. Nietzsche critiques religious language that obscures life-denying impulses. This innocent rhetoric from the realm of religious moral idiosyncrasy appears much less innocent when one grasps what tendency here drapes itself in the mantle of sublime words. The life-hostile tendency. Here, innocence has become a dangerous disguise for nihilistic impulses. And how am I supposed to be okay knowing that my choice to speak up destroyed the ability to laugh at oneself? To play with one's own flaws and see where they might be used to harm myself out. The innocent become unwitting accomplices to moral corruption through their value. This passage encapsulates diagnosis of modern aity, caught between an innocence we cannot attain and a guilt we cannot justify. Why would I need to sanctify something when I'm already willing to fight for it? Most people believe that in order to fight for something, you must sanctify it. But no. In order to fight for something, you must acknowledge its value, but you need not sanctify its value as above all else. It may still exist and mingle with its peers, so that way, when it is no longer a major influence or a necessary part of the moment, it may fade into the background as that of an NPC, while another influence takes its place and connects to the present moment. Found the thing I was looking for, here it is.